Test. Okay, can you hear me now? This is bizarre. I have no idea what happened. Yep, it is this mic. It's working fine. I don't know. I see, things that wiggle are supposed to wiggle. This is crazy, folks. I have no idea what's going on that's causing all of this. But you should have sound now. Okay, you can hear me now. I didn't do anything. I mean, I was jumping around and doing everything I could to make it all work. I even unplugged the mic and plugged it back in, and then then I touched a few more things and it started working. I have no clue. No, I can't stream on YouTube and Rumble. And when we stream on Rumble, there is no chat. It's a one way. Yes, I can live stream on Rumble, but there won't be any chat, and that's the one thing that YouTube does very well, and is the reason why Rumble is growing fast but not explosive, because the live stream crowd is staying on YouTube. If Rumble gets that thing fixed, there will be a huge exodus. So anyway, where did I leave off? Let me go back to saying, because I didn't have any mic at all, so let's try it again. Good morning to Monica Sherman, Faith and Family, Mary Taylor, Meg Huff, Pepper Leah, Tanya A, Sally H, Monica. I've got Monica. Pepper Leah, Alicia, hello, Kathy O, X Swagger, and Thomas Pearson. Good morning. It's been a crazy morning, isn't it? This is insane, because the cough button was not on. I'm looking down, I see a green light, but yet I look over at the audio mixer and there's just no lights. So don't know what's going on. Anyway, let me catch. Don't see any new names. Everybody else, we're all talking about the sound and the lack of sound, the soundlessness of it all. Okay, all right. Well, yeah, it's Monday, and it's Crazy Monday, so we will deal with it on that. But we are talking about the Kings here, and of course now everything's been rebooted, so I have to reopen all my documents. The Kings, you remember now, in these Kings, we're talking about two separate sort of kingdoms. We're talking about the kingdom of Judah, which are the two tribes that remained faithful to Jerusalem, and the sons of Solomon, which was Rehoboam, and the ongoing kings there. Remember, Rehoboam, he followed in the pretty much the overbearing tyrannical practices that Solomon sort of drifted into at the end of his life, and ended up losing the 10 tribes of Israel. The 10 tribes of Israel went and followed Jeroboam. Jeroboam was promised prosperity and goodness and greatness under God, but he ended up taking matters in his own hands and led Israel into terrible idolatry. God knows what's going on. And God put a curse upon Jeroboam, told him that he would not, that there would never be another person in his family that would be buried. They'd all, except for the one young son, there was some goodness found in him, but he said all the rest, you won't have another person in your entire heritage, your entire lineage is going to be wiped out, and they'll be eaten by vultures and dogs, but nobody is even going to have a decent burial. That's a pretty bad curse. I mean, this isn't just upon you personally, this is your whole lineage got wiped out because of the evil that he had done. Sin has deep roots, and when we enter into sin, it affects lineage. It affects generations to come. Now we go to 3 kings here. We're in Israel. Now, Israel had some pretty rotten kings. Judah at least had kings that lasted quite a long time. But we are here in Israel. We're seeing Nadab, Basha, and Ella. 3 kings. And you say, boy, we're going to cover all 3 kings? Yeah, they didn't reign very long. They didn't last very long. 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 25 and 26 says, And Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, began to reign over Israel in the 2nd year of Asa, king of Judah. Now remember, Asa, he served, 42 years? 42 years? Long time. And he reigned over Israel 2 years. Yeah, in the American presidency, that would say he didn't even make it to midterms. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of his father, and in his sin wherewith he made Israel to sin. 1 Kings 27 through 30. We pick up Basha. Hey, you only get 2 verses, because you're so wicked, you only get 2 verses in the Bible. And Basha, the son of Ahijah. Now, there are several Ahijahs. Remember, there was the prophet Ahijah, and there is the father of Basha, and these are not the same Ahijahs. Evidently, Ahijah is a name like John or Bob or something of that sort, a very common name in Israel. And Basha, the son of Ahijah, of the house of Issachar, conspired against him, against Nadab. And Basha smote him at Gibbethon, which belonged unto the Philistines, for Nadab and all Israel had laid siege to Gibbethon. So they had a military action, and Basha thought to conceal the matter of killing the king by saying, it happened in a military action, maybe he could blame it on the enemy. Well, he got caught. It was too widely known. Even in the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah, did Basha slay him and reigned in his stead. And it came to pass when he reigned that he smote all the house of Jeroboam. He left not to Jeroboam any that breatheth until he had destroyed him, according to the saying of the Lord, which he spake by his servant Ahijah the Shilonite. Now this is Ahijah the prophet in Shiloh. This is the one that Jeroboam sent his wife to go inquire about his son Abijah and whether or not he would live. Now Abijah was not a little boy. Abijah was his son, and it was a good son. God saw good in that son and said he would be laid to rest, but all the rest of your family is going to be wiped out and eaten by dogs and buzzards. So but Abijah was not a child. He was the son of Jeroboam, and they cared about him a lot. He was a good kid, and he was old enough that he had children. So, and we're going to see that coming up. A lot of times we assume that because he is the child of Jeroboam that he must have been a child as we think of a young person, but he was not. Okay, verse 30. Because of the sins of Jeroboam, which he sinned, and which he made Israel to sin, by his provocation wherewith he provoked the Lord God of Israel to anger. So Basha gets completely wiped out. Nadab gets completely wiped out. And he conspires against the king and kills him. That doesn't mean that he was doing it as ordered by God. God allowed it to happen, but what he did was wicked. And God sometimes allows wicked people to do wicked things which accomplish God's purposes, but God will then judge that. I mean, look at the Babylonians. God used that king to do wicked things in punishment of Israel. and then judged Babylon for doing it. So there's a big difference between God allowing wickedness to happen and God causing that wickedness to happen. See, there is a difference. This is much goes into the big argument about predestination versus predestination according to foreknowledge or predestination according to planning or design. God knows ahead of time who is going to be saved and who is not, but that does not mean that God selects you are going to be saved and you are not going to be saved. God does not make that choice. God is not willing that any should perish. So it's like the Trinity. We don't really understand all that stuff because we're trying to understand God, and God is so much bigger than we could begin to comprehend. But we know that the truths of Scripture are there, so however it is, God's got it under control. Now, 1 Kings 16, the first 6 verses. Then the word of the Lord came to Jehu, the son of, now we say Jehu, it may be Yehu, it could be, however that's pronounced, the son of Hanani, against Basha. Now, here you go. He just did a fulfillment of the prophecy that Ahijah pronounced against him, but for doing it, he now falls under judgment. Because God didn't tell him to do it. God just said, this is what's going to happen. For as much as I exalted thee out of the dust, and made thee prince over my people Israel, and thou hast walked in the way of Jeroboam, and hast made my people Israel to sin, to provoke me to anger with their sins, behold, I will take away the posterity of Basha, and the posterity of his house, and will make thy house like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat. You realize he, by killing Nadab, took upon him the curse that was upon the house of Jeroboam. The very thing that he fulfilled in killing all of the house of Jeroboam, he ended up bringing upon his own house. That's awesome. I mean, that's hard to wrap your head around. It's not isolated, though. Do you remember Naaman? That was he was a ruler of, what was Naaman? Was Naaman Syrian? The one who came to Elisha and for healing, and this northern king sent his servant Naaman down to be healed, and he was told to go dip in the Jordan River 7 times and you'll come up clean. And he was all upset because he said, don't we have cleaner, better rivers where I come from that I could dip in, and I thought for sure he's going to make some big to-do and some ceremonial thing and clap your hands and make the leprosy go away. But his servant said, if he told you to do something hard, wouldn't you do it? Why don't you give it a try? And so he did. And on the 7th time that he dipped in the Jordan River, he came up clean. The leprosy was gone. Well, that's not the point I wanted to get to, but you remember that story, or that account. It wasn't a story because it was true. It really happened. Now, Elisha had a servant named Gehazi, and Naaman told the prophet, he said, I will give you all of this gold and all of these things that I brought as a gift to you for to convince you to heal my leprosy. And the prophet said, I don't want anything you have. I did it because God told me to, not because of anything else. And so Naaman went back with all of the treasures that he had brought. Gehazi got greedy. Gehazi said, wait a minute, I'm going to go after this guy and I'm going to get something. because I don't get paid well enough, or what have you. And so what did he do? He hailed him down and he said, hey, my master said we've got some servants, some other prophets that came, and they're poor, and they're they don't have a lot. Don't give it to me for that, but could you give something to take care of those? And so he said, sure, and he gave him some gold, and I think he gave him some garments and things like that. Well, when he came back, he hid those things in his tent. And the prophet called him and said, the Spirit of the Lord went with you when you went and did all that. And I saw you take those gifts from Naaman. And he says, for such, the leprosy that was cleansed from Naaman is now going to fall upon you. And immediately Gehazi was leprous. Just as quickly as Naaman was made free of leprosy, that dreaded cursed disease showed up immediately upon Gehazi. There's a principle there. When he violated God's will in the area of some curse that was lifted or fulfilled, it doesn't matter, in the area of some curse, he ended up getting that same curse that fell upon him. Talk about the irony of that. And, this isn't the isolated case. It's just one of the more dramatic ones. Ooh, maybe I want to be real tight about my walk with God, because the things and the curses and the horrible things that happen in this world, I don't want any of that juju falling on me. And, that's one of those cringe moments, if you will. So, verse 4, 1 Kings 16, verse 4, him that dieth of Basha in the city shall the dogs eat. Sound familiar? Same curse that was told to Jeroboam. And him that dieth of his own of his in the fields shall the fowls of the air eat. Now the rest of the acts of Basha, and what he did, and his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? So Basha slept with his fathers and was buried in Tisra, and Ella, his son, reigned in his stead. Now, just like Jeroboam was buried, and he was a king, so was Basha buried because he was a king. But all of his descendants, they aren't even going to find a grave. So Basha slept with his father, with his fathers, died, was buried as a king, was buried in Tirzah. His son Ella reigned in his stead. 1 Kings 16, we're going to jump down a couple verses to verse 8. And in the 26th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Ella, the son of Basha, to reign over Israel in Tirzah 2 years. This is the same as Nadab. He only reigned 2 years. Man, these guys don't make it very long. And his servant Zimri, captain of half his chariots, conspired against him. Man, can you imagine that? You're a king. You can only reign 2 years, and one of your servants kills you. He was in Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arza, steward of his house in Tirzah. So this guy was a loser. He was basically just a drunk. And when he was drunk, he got killed. Zimri just had enough of him. And Zimri went in and smote him and killed him in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his stead. Well, when you use treachery to get into office, treachery is going to take care of you too. And it came to pass, when he began to reign, as soon as he sat on his throne, that he slew all the house of Basha. The same thing that fell upon Jeroboam fell upon Basha's home. And he let no one that pisseth against the wall, neither of his kinsfolk nor of his friends. Ooh. Even his friends got killed. Never be a friend of a bad person. Be careful who your friends are. You could pay for it. Thus did Zimri destroy all the house of Basha according to the word of the Lord, which he spake against Basha by Jehu the prophet. For all the sins of Basha and the sins of Ella his son, by which they sinned, and by which they made Israel to sin, in provoking the Lord God of Israel to anger with their vanities. Now we come back to Zimri. 1 Kings 16, 15 through 20. And in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, did Zimri reign. We're not getting longer reigns here, are we? 7 days. Remember his treachery, he just murdered the king before him. And he goes in to serve, and he only lasts 7 days. And the people were encamped against Gibbethon, which belonged to the Philistines. All of this happened while they were still at war with the Philistines. This battling going on, and man, talk about transitions. And the people that were encamped heard say, Zimri hath conspired, and hath also slain the king. Wherefore all Israel made Omri, the captain of the host, king over Israel that day in the camp. They said, hey, we're not going to have this traitor rule over us. They picked up Omri and said, you'll be our king. And Omri went up to Gibbethon, and all Israel with him, and they besieged Tirzah. So they encamped all the way around Tirzah, and they're going to besiege it, cut off water, cut off food. They're going to cause them to surrender. And it came to pass, when Zimri saw that the city was taken, that he went into the palace of the king's house and burned the king's house over him with fire and died. So basically, he went into the palace, set the whole palace on fire, went into the palace and let the palace fall down and burn up with him inside it. He committed suicide, basically. Horrible way to die, don't you think? For his sins which he sinned in doing evil in the sight of the Lord, in walking in the way of Jeroboam, and in his sins which he did to make Israel to sin. Now the rest of the acts of Zimri and his treason that he wrought, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? Man, we're seeing a parade of evil and sin. Now tomorrow, we're going to look at 2 more kings just preceding the worst king that ever ruled over Israel. Ugh. Bad times coming. It's like, where, oh where, is there any righteousness? I can't help but to think during all of this, what about the righteous people? That even in this wicked parade of kings, there had to be some individual believers who loved the Lord. Don't you think? Some people that actually loved God and served God and were grieved at the sins of the kings? I'm sure there were. There always seemed to be some. You kind of say, well, I know how they must be because that's us. We live in a wicked world and we see wickedness all around us. And we try to be righteous. We try to live righteously. Not everyone in Israel served the pagan gods. And some of us, are identifying, I think, with the righteous in Israel during these times. I'm trying to catch some comments here. Yeah, we've had a mess of